Pete Lembo's special teams units won South Carolina a lot of football games in 2022, and that could very well happen again in 2023.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, Gamecock Nation, and welcome back to the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, your show for the latest headlines and potential storylines on South Carolina Gamecock athletics. I'm Andrew Lyon, the host of this podcast, and also a staff writer for Gamecocks Digest over on SI.com. Thank y'all for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your first listen or watch here today. We are free and available both on YouTube and also wherever you get your audio podcasts daily. And before we get into this Thursday edition of Locked On Gamecocks, I want to let y'all know that today's show is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege, and with every order that you make, Bird Dogs will throw in a free custom Yeti-style tumbler. Pete Lembo has obviously been a humongous cog in South Carolina's football program for the past couple of years. And things really took off for Pete Lembo and his special teams units in 2022, as his special teams units helped South Carolina win multiple football games and also break a couple of streaks in the process. And Pete Lembo's special teams units could very well help South Carolina win multiple games once again in 2023. When looking back at the multiple games that South Carolina won in 2022 because of Pete Lembo and his special teams units, South Carolina won a game against Georgia State through 2 blocked punts that were returned for touchdowns. If we go to the Texas A&M game, Xavier Legette had the second longest kickoff return touchdown in school history that night. The Gamecocks, I believe, ended up only winning by 1 score. And then, of course, the Clemson game, Kai Kroger had the game of his life that day, and South Carolina also forced 2 fumbles, one on a kickoff return and another on the final punt return attempt of the game for Clemson, which helped them to snap a 9-year losing streak to the Clemson Tigers. Now, the Gamecocks are returning the most important pieces of their special teams units from last season in kicker Mitch Jeter, punter Kai Kroger, and long snapper Hunter Rogers. So, with Pete Lembo coming back along with all of these specialists, what games could South Carolina win in 2023 because of their special teams play? Well, when looking at the toss-up games specifically, there are 3 games that I point to as games South Carolina could win because of their special teams units playing a major factor. And those games are the games against the Clemson Tigers, the Texas A&M Aggies, and the Kentucky Wildcats. Let's start off with our friends from the upstate in the Clemson Tigers. Now, the Tigers are losing kicker B.T. Potter, who was there for what seems like 8 years, and punter Aiden Swanson is returning in 2023, but he averaged only 37.4 team net yards per punt this past fall. Will Shipley, who's been a star running back for the Tigers offense, admittedly, he's not actually done all that well compared to some of the other guys that we have faced, as Will Shipley only averaged 24.9 yards per kickoff return in 2022. When looking at the Clemson game, my initial thought is this. This could be a game where both Clemson and South Carolina have some long, extended offensive drives, and in certain cases, maybe some high-scoring spurts, because again, Clemson's offense is expected to probably be better than it was last year. South Carolina's offense returns Spencer Rattler and Antoine Juice Wells, the 2 biggest pieces of their offensive performances against Tennessee and Clemson this past fall, and Clemson loses a ton in their defensive front. So, point being, there could be a lot of offense in this game. So both kicking and punting could become very important. And obviously, when comparing the two teams, if you have to pick one team to win that battle, you're going to pick South Carolina. Kai Kroger could very well be a big reason why Clemson possibly loses for the second year in a row to the South Carolina Gamecocks. And if he did that, Kai Kroger would be forever a legend in Gamecock country. Let's move on to another team that I think South Carolina could beat because of special teams play this upcoming fall, and that team is the Texas A&M Aggies. Now, the Aggies returned their kicker in Randy Bond and also Nick Constantinou, who averaged only 40.5 net yards per punt last season after averaging around 46.5 or 47 net yards per punt in 2021. But the Aggies do lose probably the biggest and most explosive piece from their special teams units in kick returner Devon Achane, who was one of the best in the entire country, as he had a return average of 28.4 yards per kickoff return. Because of this, the Aggies could be hurting in that aspect in 2023. If Kai Kroger basically wins his matchup against Nick Constantinou in the punting game, field position could quickly become an aspect that greatly favors South Carolina in College Station. And here's the thing, when it comes to trying to take a home crowd out of a football game, one of the best ways to do that is to at the least slow the game down or continue to put the home team in certain sticky situations. For example, being pinned back deep into their own territory. That's not exciting, obviously, for a home crowd. The fans are not going to get all into it if their team is constantly starting from inside the 20-yard line. That is something that could very well happen in this contest because of how these two teams match up against one another. And the last team that I think that South Carolina could defeat because of their special teams units in 2023 is the Kentucky Wildcats. Kentucky's special teams unit is arguably the worst out of all three of these. They lost both their kicker and their punter from this past season. However, they do have return specialist Barian Brown coming back to Lexington for his sophomore season. And Barian Brown, he was a weapon in the return game in 2022, as he averaged 27.5 yards per kickoff return. And the Kentucky Wildcats also added a transfer out of the portal in Georgia Southern kicker Alex Rayner, who has a career field goal percentage of 76.2%. Not bad for somebody who's going into their third or fourth year of college football. So when looking at this matchup in particular, Amari Brown and Eddie Lewis, whoever is fielding punts in this game, they could have a field day against Kentucky's punt coverage team. Because obviously, if you're a punter and you don't have a good enough hang time, you're not getting distance on your kicks, you are automatically setting back the entire punt unit, because the punt coverage team, you could have the fastest guys probably on your squad as your gunners. If you're not having the ball hang up long enough, it's not going to give your coverage team a chance to get down there and essentially, quite literally, cover all the space in front of the returner so that they have no chance to get any yards off of the catch. Mitch Jeter, he has the leg to make Barian Brown a non-factor on kickoff returns. Mitch Jeter is a guy that can kick 55-plus yard field goals in the right conditions. He is a dude that hit all 11 of his field goal attempts in 2022. And that leg power could come in real handy against what could very likely be one of the best kickoff returners, not just in the SEC, but in the entire country. And then when talking about Kentucky transfer kicker Alex Rayner, I should say the transfer from Georgia Southern, Alex Rayner, he has never been in an SEC environment before, or at least he hasn't been in multiple SEC environments in one season. Imagine if Kentucky comes to South Carolina in late November, and it's a night game in Columbia. The fan base is out and they are loud. And South Carolina is performing well. That's not going to bode well for a guy like Alex Rayner, who is not used to playing in front of those kind of environments week in and week out. And sure, there might be some others that you could put ahead of Williams-Brice Stadium when it comes to fan environments in the SEC, but Williams-Brice Stadium, it is certainly up there. It is in the top 5 at a minimum when it comes to home field advantages. So, looking at each of these 3 teams, Clemson, Texas A&M, and Kentucky, there's no doubt in my mind, South Carolina could defeat all 3 of these teams in 2023, and a big reason for that would be the play of Pete Lembo's special teams units. Now, one team I did not mention out of the group that I just talked about was the Georgia Bulldogs. And that's for good reason. Georgia ranks pretty highly in just about every single statistical category, it seems like, coming off of their second straight national championship. And weaknesses are at a minimum when it comes to that program. And I'm going to be talking with Locked On Bulldogs co-host Clint Shamblin in just a couple moments to get more insight to the program and how Georgia fans feel about the fact that South Carolina's annual matchup with Georgia might be going away, or at least might be now occurring on a biannual basis. We'll dive into all of that in just a few moments right here on Locked On Gamecocks. But first, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Baseball season is obviously in full swing, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel. Because if you're a new customer that joins FanDuel today, you can get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. The Cincinnati Reds, I gotta be honest, they are on an absolute tear right now in the National League. I believe they are still currently the division leaders in the National League Central Division. Elly De La Cruz, he's probably the runaway favorite right now to win the Rookie of the Year, at least in the National League, and maybe if not all of Major League Baseball if they got such an award. If you want to put some money down a prop bet like that, or any other prop bet, don't miss your chance to snag a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 when you join FanDuel today. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon to sign up. FanDuel is the official betting partner of Major League Baseball. Welcome back to today's edition of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast, where we cover your South Carolina Gamecocks every single day. And speaking of every single day, thank you once again to all of you everydayers for making the Locked On Gamecocks podcast your daily choice for South Carolina Gamecock sports coverage. We're going to continue talking with some other hosts around the SEC from the Locked On Gamecocks podcast regarding what else going on with the team they are covering and how are things looking for their matchup between their respective team and South Carolina heading into 2023. And today we're going to be joined by a host that has probably had a lot of fun covering his team, to say the least, over the past couple of years, as I'm pleased to be joined by Locked On Bulldogs host Clint Shamblin, who co-hosts the Locked On Bulldogs podcast covering the Georgia Bulldogs. Clint, welcome to the show, man. Appreciate you coming on.
Hey, glad being here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, usually I have a pretty good and somewhat, I guess, complex question regarding South Carolina's matchup with said team from 2022. But with this one, there really isn't a whole lot to be said. Georgia ran roughshod over South Carolina in Columbia in 2022. I know the Bulldog fans enjoyed every single bit of it. So, Clint, I'll keep this one short and sweet. What do you think led to Georgia running away with this game as easily as they did this past fall?
Yeah, the thing that happened to Georgia opponents every single year and will continue happening as long as Kirby Smart is the coach is if you can't control the trenches, if you can't keep them on pace with your own game, it's going to be long. And when South Carolina couldn't run the ball, that was the end of it. Like you're not going to get huge yards and huge gains against Georgia. Kentucky does this every single year. Kentucky gets successful runs against Georgia of 3.5 yards. And that's literally keeps them on pace with everything else. Because maybe you could do some run option, you could do some quick screen, you can get the game going. Look at Missouri game from last year. This is kind of you have to commit to the run and stay consistent. And South Carolina could not do that at all. I think the leading rusher for South Carolina that game, maybe at like 30 yards or something like that in total. I can't remember exactly. Lloyd had 22 yards, 9 carries, 22 yards. Even McDowell, 8 carries, 33 yards. The longest they had was 13. That's just not going to cut it against Georgia. So if you do that, then you have Spencer Rattler carrying the team. And near the end of the year, he came on. But this was early on in the season. No, he wasn't in rhythm yet. He did not have that offense going. Beamer did not have it going. And so once you couldn't do that against the defense, then they could pin their ears back. And then Georgia's offense with Brock Bowers just said, let's roll. And I don't think South Carolina had a linebacker or a safety to match up against Bowers that day. Not many do, to be completely honest and fair.
Yeah.
But if you can't slow him down. So that was the kind of avalanche that started the crescendo going forward.
Yeah, South Carolina's offensive line unit, I'm willing to admit myself last year, there's definitely, that was a mismatch from start to finish, and it sucks because Marshawn Lloyd, South Carolina felt like they had a running back that could at least, somewhat give Georgia's linebackers at least a little bit of more issue than they're used to, but again, you're right. Yeah, if you can't get any big chunk plays in the run game against Georgia, you just don't stand a chance, and that's why the Bulldogs have dominated the SEC well over the last couple of years. Clint, looking ahead to the 2023 matchup, both of these teams are going to get back to playing each other early in the season, or at least they're going to continue doing so, I should say. Georgia, they get a lot of, how should I put this, criticism over their non-conference slate, which I know is not the Bulldogs' fault. I know that Oklahoma, there was that whole matchup that got scrubbed off, but Georgia does play Ball State before the Gamecocks, and they play UAB afterwards, so pretty easy start to the season. Then for South Carolina, you got Furman, admittedly before you played Georgia, but then you go to Athens, and then you got an intriguing matchup with the Bulldogs from the SEC West in Mississippi State after that. So let's not focus on the dynamic. Let's focus on this question, Clint. With Georgia reloading at multiple spots, including quarterback, is there even a iota of concern on Georgia's end that, hey, it's early in the year, maybe some guys aren't going to be in rhythm, like you mentioned earlier, so possibly this game could be a little bit trickier than we would maybe envision going into the season?
Look, the first thing I got to say is I know Georgia fans aren't going to like me saying this, and it's going to sound like a slight against South Carolina. I swear it's not. So Beamer is cringe for me at times, okay? And yet, dudes play for him. And again, I will take a guy who gets people to play for him every single day. Jimbo is cringe. Nobody wants to play for him at all. That's the worst in the entire world. South Carolina, I think you guys are onto something. I think the transfers that are coming in, I think the recruit that's here, if you look at what's happened. And so is there a chance, again, I don't think Georgia loses this game, but if you want to talk about a competitive game, I believe in Beamer. I believe the talent's there. I believe in the fan base and the school backing things. And here's where it's going to come down to. And this comes down, I think South Carolina matches this description of other teams that have tried to do this against Georgia. If Spencer Rattler is off at all, the Georgia defense is like sharks with blood in the water, and he will be eaten alive. And there's just not, that's the avalanche coming forward that end. And we have edge rushers, Michael Williams this year coming off the edge. Daniel and I, my co-host, think that he's in for an all SEC type season, maybe even first, second team All-American. He could put it together. The talent there is incredible. Linebackers coming back. Dumas Johnson is a beast, leading tackler. We got reload there as well. And now the offensive side, we'll get to that in a moment. I'll ask you some questions maybe on how South Carolina matches up that wise. But the defense, we've been saying this for 2 years in a row, and it's crazy because we had historic defense, and then we said this defense might be better, and they were on par with that historic defense, a little less than historic. This year, you want to talk about pure talent? My word. Georgia has guys, dudes, every level of the field that are incredible. A pure lockdown corner. A safety, Malachi Starks, who I am all in on. He's my favorite Bulldog right now. Just my favorite dude. He does things in the back end of that defense that are incredible. And then linebackers, forget about it. We're 3 deep again. It's like the championship run all over again with N'Kobe and Tyndall and Quay. It's ridiculous. Now, the offensive side, I think our offensive line is the deepest position group we have. I think that is that's incredible. I think wide receiver and tight end Brock Bowers, to me, is the best offensive weapon in all of college football outside of quarterback. And even if you add quarterback, I still hold true to that. Running back, we added depth to it, and we're going to see if Kendall Milton can stay healthy. If he does, okay, difference maker. And yeah, it's come down to that quarterback position. All reports coming out of camp, every last one of them. And again, I don't take insiders or gurus because reports are reports. We'll see snap one. But I will say this. it seems as though we have a bevy of talented guys. 1 through 3 is heavy. And if Carson Beck is, I think it's Carson Beck. If he's not the dude, it's going to be somebody else. It's whoever the coaching staff thinks. I think we'll be fine. So I think defensively, Georgia's going to be fine. South Carolina, and unless you got a tackle that is just a hidden gem that's going to be drafted, maybe in the first 2 rounds to keep Micah Williams and the rest of them at bay, I think it's going to be very tough sledding. And Spencer Rattler better be on point. And if he's not, long day. So that's my take there. On the other side, if South Carolina has somebody that is a hybrid in the middle of the field, that's where it's really going to come down to for Georgia. Middle of the field can come in and bang in the box as well as keep the lid on the deep ball, Ladd McConkey, as well as Brock Bowers, those sorts of things. If South Carolina has that and the quarterback isn't set yet, because as you mentioned, the schedule is not going to get somebody ready, right? Like Tennessee Martin, okay, Ball State, whatever. We're going to be out after the second quarter, okay? Like, sweet. Right. And if we're not, holy geez, we got a whole nother problem on our hands. Then I'm really, really grabbing the bucket to my nausea is going to hit. So we're not going to be ready. This is going to be the first true test. That's going to be wild for me. So does South Carolina have that banger safety hybrid linebacker in the box that can come down and keep it over the top? Because that's what's going to maybe keep them in the game with that. And so I'll give that to you, Andrew. Does South Carolina have that dude on the defense?
Well, Clint, the Gamecocks do have a guy that they think could be a future first-round draft pick at safety in Nick Emenworry. He's a kid that actually played linebacker and safety when he played high school a couple years back. And quite honestly, he quickly became the Gamecocks' probably best all-around defensive player early on in the 2022 season, which is both a good thing, but also maybe not the greatest thing. Goes back to trying to build depth to try to compete against teams like Georgia. But again, yeah, you're right. You have to have your star players basically just go all out against Georgia if you want to have any chance of winning. That means Spencer Rattler, you can't make any mistakes. You basically got to have like a Tennessee-like performance. If you're Nick Emenworry, then you can't let anyone get behind you. You can't make any mistakes on the back end. So South Carolina, I think they are starting to get some players where it's like, hey, you can kind of match up for the most part in these areas, but as a whole collective unit, you're still a ways away. I think that South Carolina's still a couple recruiting classes away. Beamer's doing great on the trail right now, but yeah, still a lot of time left before they can get to the point where you can sit there and say, okay, we can compete with Georgia for 4 quarters. I don't think they're there yet, but they are getting closer, and I think Gamecock fans got to keep that in mind as the next couple of years continue to progress.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now that you mentioned Nick's name, I do remember him. Big kid, right? Like 6'4", or something like that. Built strong. Yeah. That's the type of guy that you're going to need in the SEC for long-standing success. And so, yeah, you're right. South Carolina fan, I know this is like, don't take this as, again, this is not me even patronizing you. I'm sad going forward that we won't get to play you more often because I actually enjoy these games, not because of the big margin of victory last year, because I actually think South Carolina is onto something. And just like in the now defunct West, now, LSU is the team to beat now for me in the West this year and ongoing. A&M is not. I wish they were better. If you're looking at the East, South Carolina does have some pieces in play, and they're backing Beamer Ball a great deal, which is what y'all should do. So if I'm from an outside perspective, if any South Carolina fan come yelling at you for Beamer and what they're doing, like just shut them down immediately. Like just be quiet and get away because it's a good thing that you guys got going on there.
Oh, yeah, no, without a doubt. And, I've talked about this before, Clint, but, the thing about Shane Beamer that I think some people don't look at, I know obviously that there's times where he wears his emotions on his sleeve and it kind of rubs a lot of people the wrong way. But the thing about Shane is he's prepared a long time to be in this kind of position. This is a guy that has learned from people like obviously his father, Frank Beamer, coached under a guy like George O'Leary, who was at Central Florida and Georgia Tech at one point, Sylvester Crew, Mississippi State, Kirby Smart at Georgia, one of the few guys that goes against Kirby Smart every single year and actually has an idea of what goes on in that building. So in terms of just pure knowledge, Shane Beamer, he could potentially be that guy. But again, obviously talent is something that you got to have if you want to contend with a team like Georgia. So Clint, to go back to offense, because you mentioned Carson Beck, you mentioned that quarterback room. Obviously, when you break in a new quarterback, you've always got maybe some reservations. With Georgia, that might not be the case here, but comparing him to Stetson Bennett, a kid that obviously accomplished way more than probably anyone ever imagined he would in his college career. From a talent perspective, could Carson Beck be better than Stetson Bennett?
This is so wild to me because, again, Stetson Bennett, I think, just has this mechanism inside of him that takes all of the doubt and turns it into like potential and talent. I don't know how the kid does it, but he's already shown out in Rams camp. All reports from, again, out there, they don't have any other quarterbacks. They have Matt Stafford and Stetson Bennett. So there is talent there. The kid has definitely progressed like that. If you're talking arm talent, just pure arm talent, Carson Beck does have it. I've been on our podcast saying that if he's able to fully embrace Mike Bobo, and it's just a continuation. Mike Bobo is continuing the offense. It's not a new system. It's the same system from last year in Todd Monken. If that continues, Carson Beck, given the opportunity, is going to break single season records for UGA. Stetson Bennett, they want a balanced attack. They want something that, again, I think the SEC screwed up, or college football screwed up by changing the clock rules, because now Kirby Smart, we call it the death march, in which beginning of the third, fourth quarter, Kirby just says, stop me from running. I'm going to bleed the clock out. There's this famous gif of now Luke, the old coach, saying milk it. He's just doing this from the sideline, milk it, like milk that clock going.
Yeah.
I think that's what happened a lot last year. If you look at the Stetson Bennett's fourth quarter stats, they're like he's 4 of 5 for 60 yards in the fourth quarter all year long because he was out by then.
Right.
If Carson Beck is able to keep the same sustained success, yeah, I think he is more talented. I think he is better than Stetson Bennett, who, by the way, the greatest quarterback in UGA history is Stetson Bennett for the 2 natties and what he's able to accomplish and do. And come at me, Georgia fan, and they have countless times. I think Carson Beck could have one of the best one year in Georgia history, and then he's going to ride that off. And if you're looking at a guy who's going to catapult himself in the top 15 conversation, he has the height, he has the weight, he has the measurables, and all of us, he has the arm talent. Again, we love using that term, but if he puts things behind it, there was the throw actually against South Carolina where he came in and he was running to the right and he just zinged it right on a line for a touchdown. Was incredible to me. Those sorts of things, Carson Beck is the guy, I think, again, without seeing him in actual games, not just scrimmages, he could be. And if that's the case, ooh, my goodness. Now what are you going to do against Georgia? You're going to stop Kendall Milton and the running attack that is always there and the best offensive line cohesion group-wise we've had in 3 years? Okay, that seems unlikely. And Carson Beck's able to get Brock Bowers and now 2 all SEC wide receivers transferring into Georgia. Like, that's, love it. And rah-rah, like, holy geez, plus Brock. I think there's more talent in the receiving core and with the running back and the offensive line. If Carson Beck is even competent, that's going to be the case. Now, with that being said, the one surefire way to get on Kirby Smart's bad side, because his defense and his team, he knows he can win 16, 13 games all year long. You throw an interception, you don't take care of the ball, he will bench you for literally anybody else on the team. Look at how Stetson Bennett came to fame. Like, that's what happened. Guys didn't take care of the football, and Kirby's like, well, I don't know, send the mailman out there. And all of a sudden the mailman's like, oh, okay, no worries, I'll just win back-to-back national championships. If Carson Beck doesn't take care of the ball, he will go quickly to the bench, and it'll be the shortest leash because we'll go see what else Vandegrift has or anybody else in that system very, very quickly. But my money is on Carson Beck, knowing that, being really, really, really tight with Bobo and knowing the system and knowing what he has to do to get that success. And yeah, he could turn in one of the best seasons by a UGA quarterback that I've seen ever.
Yeah, it sounds like Dylan Raiola may need to be on standby then in case Kirby Smart's got that short of a leash with his quarterbacks. But so, Clint, we talked about the quarterback situation. Obviously, Georgia, again, immensely talented, probably the most talented roster in all college football right now. But, Clint, let's address sort of maybe your one concern you might have, or if there is a concern. Is there a position group where maybe if you feel like the opposing team's got the dudes to match up, you might have a little bit of worry? Or, is it special teams? If you do come down to like, hey, a couple kicks here and there, maybe you got issues with kickers and punters. South Carolina would love to hear that if they could keep it that close this year. But what would be, I guess, maybe your one concern if you do have one for Georgia in 2023?
There's a couple position, just kind of the other side of the cornerback position. We have one cornerback that is not locked down. We have about 5 names that could come out of that. And if you know anything about college football, what you do is if you find a weakness, you exploit it all day long. And at any given time, there could go a bang for a touchdown. So if one blown assignment, as Georgia fans from 2017 know very, very well, one blown assignment loses you the national championship game. That is one concern. So we have a cornerback that is still up in the air, and who knows who it's going to be. no one does. No one outside of Kirby Smart and Dan Lanning. Not Dan Lanning, I apologize. He's off in Oregon. But the defensive coordinator position at Georgia, that is Kirby Smart and everything that he brings. I think that's going to be one point of interesting concern for us. The second point of interesting concern is the defensive line. We have edge guys that have shown out and done their thing, but the interior of the defensive line is still up in the air. That's a question mark for us. That's going to be interesting going forward. I think we have depth. I think we have talent. Interesting there. We got Amarius Mims, who went to the transfer portal and said, no, I don't like what's going on out there, came back. He seems to be slated at the right tackle position. Now, if you look at left tackle, that's interesting. We don't know exactly who. We have some indications, but that's not what UGA has come to expect. Left tackle has always been, for the last 3, 4, 5 years, first-round guys over there. It's not the case right now. Okay, we have to understand that. Left guard as well. Xavier Truss is a guy whose names have come up a ton in the left guard conversation. I don't like that. I would rather somebody else. He is not so nimble on his feet, and pass pro set is really, really hard. So that gives me concern there. I think somebody else will take that left guard position. Quarterback, we've already talked about. Outside of that, I think those are it. If you have somebody that can get off tackle and get to the quarterback and disrupt in the backfield, that can really, really mess with the system. Now, all of a sudden, we have to have Brock Bowers up on swing passes. We have to do short passes, rah, love it, those sorts of things. And now we don't get to do what we want to do, which is take the top off the defense. That is Georgia's offense. That's Mike Bobo. That's what Todd Monken has. Again, go back and look at the stats. Look at Stetson Bennett's average completion. It's a lot of yards downfield. Carson Beck doesn't have time to set and do that. That's where we're going to get into trouble. If those would be the kind of the three areas, other corner position, interior defensive line, and then left tackle question marks. I think we'll have enough talent to do that. But as of right now, those are maybe the weakest points, if I could put those in quotes.
Shane Beamer, if you're listening to this podcast for whatever reason right now, put Nicholas Harper at edge rusher some against Georgia. At least that's what Clint Shamblin is telling me here on today's show. He is Clint Shamblin of the Locked On Bulldogs podcast. Clint, appreciate you so much for coming on to today's show. Where can all of the people find your work on the Georgia Bulldogs?
Yeah, go over on Twitter, Dogs Podcast, interact with us there. We love doing that, as well as subscribe over on YouTube, as well as wherever you get podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, all the Locked On Bulldogs. Come find us and interact over there.
All right, Clint, thank you so much again for coming on to today's show. For all you Locked On Gamecock viewers and listeners, thank y'all for tuning in to today's show. Have a great rest of your day, and I'll be sure to catch y'all on the next show of the Locked On Gamecocks podcast.